Welcome back to Balanced. I'm Ben.
And I'm Steve.
And this week we're discussing the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, trial, verdict. And I think there's many things kind of underneath of that. Covers white privilege, covers gun laws, covers some aspects of the legal system. So there's kind of a lot packed into that case.
Yeah. So, let's just start with talking. The verdict happened probably, what was it, week before last? And I think, just want to go ahead and, give me your general thoughts. I wanted to ask you, because I've got some thoughts, but about just generally the situation, like how did this kid get into this situation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this case is very interesting because it's very gray. A lot of times you have these things that kind of blow up in the public sphere, and these cases that get a lot of attention. And when you really drill into them and look at it, they're pretty cut and dry, public opinion aside. I feel like this case, a lot of gray area in it. And for me personally, as I followed some of the coverage and then ended up watching the trial and kind of digested a lot of the information, I found myself kind of going back and forth on it in a couple different ways. I mean,
this is regardless of what you say, a protest, or there was some rioting going on. There was some burning of some buildings. Like, I don't see how a 17-year-old kid should be there. Like when my sons were 17, and if they said, "Hey, I want to go out to this protest," even if that's what they called it, I would say, no, you know what? It's nighttime. It's dark. There's a lot of people out there. There's been fires. I don't think you should be there.
Yeah, the list of reasons why he shouldn't have been there is quite long.
Yeah,
quite long. Quite outweighs any possible valid reason for him being there. Yeah, it's
which leads me to believe that, if anything, at the end of the day, I'm sort of shocked that someone wouldn't try to charge his parents with some sort of, I don't know what the charge would be, but you're supposed to sort of, they're letting him be in a dangerous position. So,
yeah, I think for me, like when I first heard about this or first saw this, it was shortly after it happened. My initial thought was like, the early information was that he was 17, so a minor, and that he's in this very volatile situation with an assault rifle. There are certain things about that just, I think a lot of people were probably like, wow, that sounds like a terrible set of circumstances. I mean, how could a 17-year-old be running around with an AR-15? That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I agree. And there is a law. That's why that judge dropped that charge almost immediately at the start of the trial, saying, because there's a law that in Wisconsin that apparently 17-year-olds are allowed to have a long gun, so like a rifle, in public. And, to me, I read that as there's a lot of country and rural areas and farms and people who have large plots of land, and there's a lot of hunting, a lot of woodsmen and outdoorsmen rather, type of people who hunt and fish.
Sure.
And that law is because maybe a 17-year-old could go out on his farm or in a plot of land during deer season, before school starts, and hunt a deer without his parents. I mean, that's probably why that law is there. I don't think anyone made that law because they wanted 17-year-olds walking in the street in town with AR-15s.
So do you think that law maybe needs to be revisited, re-looked at, rewritten, maybe written in a way that allows 17-year-olds to carry hunting rifles in rural areas, but prevents them from carrying assault rifles in urban areas?
I think it will be. I think it should be. And, assault rifle or not, I don't think it, at least within city limits, things like that, there should be. Or I could see it even changing, that they say, you know what, you just have to be 18, like legal age. They could just go to that. Something's got to change with it. I think it will. once, and we both watched the trial. I know not together and talking about it, but looked at it and as it was going on. What are your thoughts? Like, do you think this was, regardless of he shouldn't have been there? I think we agree that on that. Do you think this was self-defense as, written in the law? Like he was feared for his life?
So as I mentioned before, the more that I learned about the case and the more details I absorbed, I find myself kind of going back and forth with my initial thought of like, wow, that's completely ridiculous that a 17-year-old was in that situation with an assault rifle running around. And then watching the trial, not only is he in that situation armed, he's pretending to be and telling people that he's a medic. Was it self-defense? So one thing that I came away from after watching the trial was that every person that he shot or shot at was engaged in what you could reasonably think was an attack. I mean, he wasn't just spraying bullets aimlessly. He shot at people who were either attacking him, pursuing him, attempting to hurt him. So what I saw, in the trial, they played those videos over and over and over again in slow motion, and so everyone could see exactly what was going on. I think, legally, I think the defense did a good job, portraying his actions as self-defense. There was one thing that came out a bit later that the prosecution said that I thought was interesting and kind of stuck with me a little bit. And he was saying that if you yourself have created the dangerous situation, you give up your right to claim self-defense. And I thought that was really interesting. That begs a bigger question about his role.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and I think that might be valid. So if I create a dangerous situation, if I have a gun and I walk into a bar and start pushing people around and screaming at people, and then someone comes to try to, kick my ass, and then I shoot him, say, well, he was coming at me. Like, yeah, I clearly created that. And I'm sure claiming self-defense in that case probably might turn out differently. I think the problem with saying for them to say that he created it was this was a whole lot bigger than him, and there was a whole lot of other people out there that were both protesting and trying to, quote unquote, protect property. And most of those were adults, I would bet. So I think that would be hard for them to make that argument that he created it. I think that danger was there and he inserted himself into, like stupidly. Because to me, if it was me and I saw that on TV, I'm not going down there. Right. And no one in my family is, because it's dangerous.
Yeah. And you're not a cop and you have no business being down there. And there's really no good is going to come out of that. It's not your duty to patrol the streets.
Sure. And so at the end of the day, looking at the video, like you said, I think the people were attacking him. And I think it was reasonable for a reasonable person to say, I would have been scared for my life in that situation. I do think, looking at the situation and how those people came at him, if he didn't do what he did, he would have been like, or could possibly have been like, Reginald Denny, like beat up on the street and just, for who knows how long, that terrible thing. And so therefore, I think, by the letter of the law, how it's written and what the standards are, I think it was self-defense, although it easily could have been avoided. He should have never been there. We already talked about that. So
yeah, I think that's fair. And I would agree with that. There's one other point I just wanted to say as it relates to kind of the minutia of the footage of what happened. And this was a point that the defense and the prosecution went back and forth on. I was very surprised that the prosecution didn't hone this point a bit better, but there was a moment when Gage Groisich, is that how you say his name?
I think so.
Was testifying, and he essentially, the defense got him to admit that his gun was pointed at Kyle Rittenhouse when he shot. And I was very surprised. No one mentioned this, but there is a difference between aiming a handgun at someone and a handgun being pointed in someone's direction during a very dynamic situation with a lot of movement in it. I mean, I watched the videos very closely. I never saw Gage aiming his gun at Kyle Rittenhouse as if he intended to shoot him. I saw him running behind him with the gun in his hand. I saw that moment where his hands are kind of up, and he's like I said, it's very dynamic, and the barrel does pass in front of Kyle Rittenhouse in a way, but it didn't look to me like Gage ever intended to shoot him.
Yeah, I think, what was he saying? If he was saying, I'm going to kill you, and just holding the gun and not really aiming it yet, I think that's probably would be good enough. But I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know. And I don't remember if he said what he said to the kid, like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to get you. So I think that makes a difference. If you were running at me with a pistol in your hand and said, I'm going to kill you, like, I don't really care if you're aiming it at me at that point. I'm thinking, hey, he's telling me what he's going to do here. So, so that could be a difference. But, at the end of the day, I believe it should have been avoided. I believe that it was self-defense. And I believe, based on that, the verdict, I think, surprised me a little bit, because I think there was a charge of like reckless endangerment that maybe could have applied. But then they're saying you're at a riot, or a violent protest that it's with some violent people at it who are acting out. You just being there with a loaded AR-15 when you don't need to be there is reckless. I think it is. And but I think if they do that, they have to charge every single person who was out there, and anyone out there who was an adult with a weapon protecting someplace. Like, it's just,
well, to that point, and I think the prosecution said this too, there's only one person who shot anyone that night.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a big distinction.
I mean, but if it was, but I mean, the same thing, reckless endangerment. If someone's burning a house down, I think that's reckless endangerment, or that's vandalism or whatever. And other people being in a violent riot saying, oh, my friend's got a storefront downtown, I'm going to go stand in front with a shotgun just to make sure that's still pretty sketchy. There's insurance for things like that, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe there could have been one charge, but I guess the way it worked out, I mean, they let him off. I think probably a big part of that, in my mind, is maybe because he's just a stupid kid. And they said, well, he was being attacked. We wish it didn't happen, but if we're just following the law, according to what the parameters of what it takes to qualify, for something to be self-defense,
So you were surprised by the verdict?
No, I thought that he would get off, but I thought they'd have some lesser charge. I thought there would be one of the lesser charges that did not include murder, something.
Yeah.
But I don't know that should have happened, but I thought someone would be like, okay, we're going to let him off, because it seemed like self-defense, but there's still just a little something, and I feel like that. I think it was a reckless endangerment charge that I thought maybe that could stick, and that would have come with probably, a couple months and some probation. And
I would say, as I watched, and just given what I know about Wisconsin, what I know about the gun obsession that we have in this country, I came to believe, and I remember specifically talking to my brother about this. I was like, oh yeah, this kid's gonna get off. I just didn't see the jury or convicting him based on everything that once you really like unpack everything and look at it, I just didn't see it happening.
Yeah. It leads me to believe why people were, I think, the media mishandled this from the start, before the trial. And of course, there's two sides. I'm sure Fox News was probably saying that, the kid was attacked. And I'm sure CNN and sort of that more left news was saying that, he was a crazy guy killing protesters. In the court of public opinion, I think so many people had made their decision because of the way the media handled this. And then that's why you have people upset. because people are thinking, hey, this is done. This guy's a killer, and all we have to do is just watch, so we could be glad that the right thing happened and he goes to jail. Then, and the reason I believe they mishandled it so much, because myself included, once we watched the trial, you're like, wow, like there's a lot of details in there that we didn't know. And suddenly you start thinking, like you said, well, I think he'll get off. I think, even though you might have before, if you just went with what you heard on the news and not watched the trial, you might be like, how did this guy get off? But watching Kate, the steps, the questioning and everything. So I think the media mishandled it before, leading up to. During it, I saw you could have Fox News on and CNN on, two separate screens, and they're saying exactly opposite things about the same answer to a question.
Yeah.
And so during the trial, they're just both not trying to report what's being said or what's happening, just basically saying, hey, our side, our slant, our slant, and reinforcing that. So
Yeah, well, I'll just add that I didn't follow the case or the news coverage really at all leading up to the trial. And when I started watching the trial itself, I think I was watching the PBS stream, which had no commentary, and I was really just trying to get the most neutral view. So I know there were some, because I did read about, I think I read somewhere that Joe Biden had made a comment or had referred to him as a white supremacist or something like that. I didn't hear that myself, but I did hear about it.
Basically, there were some people after the trial saying, basically, so this white supremacist got off and protesting now, people, to their right of assembly and protesting now, it's just okay to shoot. Like open season on protesters for Black Lives Matters or any sort of protester, because this white supremacist got off.
And where did the white supremacist thing come from? Because I could understand if he went out there and shot a couple Black people, but he shot other white people.
Well, it did because the reason they brought that in was because it was like a Black Lives Matter based.
So just by virtue of shooting people who were on that side of it, for that cause.
Yeah, like here is a protest being run or supported by Black Lives Matter. So it's a pro African American protest and rights. And a white guy shows up with a gun at that. They're like, well, he's obviously a white supremacist.
I didn't get in everything that I saw, I never got a white supremacist vibe from him or really from anyone else that was there, any of the other guys that were there with the military gear and the rifles and stuff. My kind of impression was of a bunch of guys who had, it was a little cringy, if I'm totally honest with you. I mean, strutting around with your military gear on. I said to my wife at one point, it's like I'm looking at a bunch of white guys who have fake authority and real guns. Like that's the impression that I got. Those guys had even if you have military experience, you were in the military, you're not now, and this isn't a war zone. And it just struck me as a little bit of an excuse for people to pull out their gear and walk around the streets and feel like badasses.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I want to jump in here because I was in the military. I was in the infantry. I was in a paratrooper. So, I went to Iraq way back in, the first go around, back in the, early 90s. And I don't own a bunch of gear like that. Right. I would bet most of those people out there with these strap-on special slings for their ARs and their cargo pants, cargo pockets on the pants and their belt clips and everything.
These guys are wearing body armor.
Yeah. These guys, I would bet most of these guys have never been in the military. I know way too many people that I've met that think because they played,
Call of Duty.
Yeah, Call of Duty, and because they bought an AR-15, that they somehow have some skill to do something, and like, you don't have training. You should, it's, let's use the word, and I'll use it. Because I know you probably would want to use it. Wannabes.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
the,
exactly what I was saying.
the funniest thing that veterans that I know say, the best line is, when someone's talking or telling us about their new weapon they just bought, the best, funniest thing is, I was going to join the Marines, back when I was in, but it's like, oh yeah, you were, right? Oh, I almost went into the Army back. It's like, yeah, but you didn't. So shut up about it and stop acting cool and wearing all these clothes.
Yeah, I think it was, I heard Geraldo Rivera at one point refer to Kyle Rittenhouse as having a hero complex. And I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what a big part of what was going on there.
And here's what I think too. If you think about being there and walking around being the tough guy, with the weapon, feeling like you are in Call of Duty or whatever. But then if anything goes wrong and suddenly he runs into some badass who's going to wreck him, it's like, hey, wait, medical? I was just here to try to help people medical. If you were just trying to help people and you just want to make sure people get Band-Aids if they fell down and skinned their elbow, why you have a gun?
Yeah, especially once I'll even give him the benefit of the doubt of just being young and maybe not recognizing how antagonizing the gun itself would be. But once you're in that situation and once you have a sense of how hostile the entire situation is, to continue to strut around, and I'm using that word very intentionally, because if you look at the footage of these guys, there was some strutting. They were strutting.
Agreed. There, absolutely. I think it's a bunch of wannabe guys who, it was the chance to like strap on your thing and be out there like, hey, because you think it looks cool. When you see footage of guys actually doing it in Afghanistan or Iraq, well, then, go sign up. There's plenty of spots open for that. Do it. And then you can really do it instead of, half of these guys are fat and out of shape and they're out there like, if you don't have that gun, like, no one's worried about you.
Yeah. I was curious what your thoughts were on that. I'm glad that we touched on that because I know that you're ex-Army, and I was just curious what your perspective was.
Yeah, absolutely. That type of thing. I know for veterans, for the most part, there's always people, right? But like, a weapon's like a tool, like, especially if you're in the infantry and did that, it's like carrying a tool. It's not like a cool thing. It's used for something. It's serious, and the safety with it. I mean, it's just, I think those are wannabes. I think they're probably shouldn't have been able to be there, right? Because it's just dangerous. Let's, have protesters. Suddenly there's no protest problem for two reasons after everything happens. Because one, the National Guard was there. Two, it's freezing cold in Wisconsin at this time of year. I mean, like, freezing cold. Whereas it was summertime when those original protests happened.
Yeah.
So I think those were good things. But they just, I think if those guys didn't show up and they had, the National Guard there the first time when the people were burning down stores or whatever, then probably, none of this would have happened, right?
Right.
It would have been a non-issue. So in the end, Rittenhouse was not guilty, and I would say, like, he won the case, because as hard as it is for people, it was self-defense. They were attacking him, and because there's a law that says a 17-year-old is allowed to have a gun, and there was no curfew, and frankly, I think the prosecution did a terrible job. I think the guy was demeaning, and I'll give you one point on it. Like, for instance, Rittenhouse was asked, did you ever see this man before that time? And he said, because one of the guys said to him, hey, you pointed your weapon at me. And he said, oh, I did. And Rittenhouse, on the stand, He said, why did you say that? He said, it was a sarcastic joke. I told you I never saw him before. And right there, then that prosecutor for the next 2 hours kept telling the judge and the jury, I can't believe he just said that. He said he did point the gun at him. No, he said that was a sarcasm. And everyone knew that. I knew that watching it. The judge knew it and was shaking his head. I'm sure everyone in the jury knew that. Why do you're treating us like idiots? He was condescending. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room. Clearly he wasn't. I think he came across like a terrible prosecutor, like he didn't know wholly what he was doing. He kept, according to the judge, breaking rules and, bringing things up that he shouldn't have.
There were definitely some missteps. I didn't find him unlikable. There were definitely parts where I see what you're saying about him. He came across a bit condescending. There were definitely, when, for example, when he was asking him questions about the rifle, and he was asking him if he played Call of Duty. It's like there was definitely some parts of the attack that felt. I shouldn't say the attack. There were some parts of their strategy that felt a little out of place. Felt like they were grasping at straws.
Agreed. So after this happens, the verdict. I was at work when it happened, and another woman who sits a little bit down from me, a few cubes down, in the cube farm that I sit in. I know she was talking with me about it earlier, and I said, "Oh, were you watching? The verdict just came in." She said, "Oh, what happened?" And I said, "It was not guilty on all charges." And she was like slumped down in her chair, And I said, "So what do you think?" She said, "Well, I just think, he got off because of white privilege." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" Because
I just want to ask a quick question. So in this case, because I've heard the white privilege thing come up, people have been discussing the case. I've heard white privilege. In this case, and just so I'm clear, and maybe just so the people listening are clear, the white privilege in this case is really about the fact that he shot 3 people and walked up to the police, and they drove right past him, and he was able to leave and then later turned himself in. And whereas if he had been a black kid running around with a rifle and shot 3 people, the situation would have ended much differently. Is that the...
Well, and that's what I said. So explain this, because I don't understand. And so she says, if it was the same situation, if Rittenhouse, the same exact situation, Rittenhouse was black, she said he wouldn't have been not guilty. And I said, okay, I get what you're saying. That's what she's saying.
The verdict would have been different.
Yeah.
Not the outcome of that night, but the actual the court case.
Both probably.
Gotcha.
That's what she's saying. And I said, so I thought of that. And I said to myself, like, if I'm looking, and we just discussed this, if in my mind, I watched the whole thing and I'm like, well, I think, although let's agree, we already agreed he shouldn't have been there. It was avoidable, but he was there, and he was allowed to have the rifle by the law. And he did meet everything according to the jury that said it was self-defense. And the jury therefore said, well, we're saying not guilty. So I'm thinking, well, so according to the law, if he's not guilty, then how is the verdict a result of privilege? And I'm sure this woman at where I work is not the only one who thinks that. If it's like, hey, here's the law, and within the confines of whether or not you think the laws are correct, which we already said one of them needs to be changed for sure.
Yeah, right? For sure.
Here it is, and he didn't meet the threshold where he would be guilty, so therefore he's off. So in that case, you would say everything worked. And if you think it shouldn't work that way, well, then we need to change the law. But in this case, everything worked because he didn't meet it. What do you think about that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. And it is an interesting point. I mean, I was trying to understand the white privilege argument, and I was looking at it from the events of the event itself. But the trial, I mean, that is an interesting question, because regardless of, he happened to be a white guy, but there was plenty of people who thought he should have been found guilty of something. I mean, but I I have sat on the jury for a murder case, and they really, put the fear of God into you that if there's any reasonable doubt whatsoever, you really have to follow, like you said, to the letter, the law. You have to look at things through that lens. So I don't know what would have happened. I don't know how. I'm not saying that there's not such a thing as white privilege, but I don't know in this case how big of a role him being white played. I mean, certainly his the way that he was heralded by the right, I don't think that would have happened had he been a black teenager.
I mean, I think I have to agree with that. There's, so he gets off doesn't mean that, he's the big hero here.
I would go a step further. I think it's probably a terrible idea generally to portray him as such, or to fail to acknowledge that he had no business being there, should not have been there. I mean, and I know, like we've said, I've heard other people say this too, like, well, he was 17-year-olds do stupid things. There's a world of difference between a 17-year-old being stupid and crashing his dad's car and a 17-year-old being stupid and shooting 3 people and killing 2.
Sure. So what are some things that people are saying that like sort of portray him?
Well, so since the trial, I've been following the case a little bit more closely. As I said, leading up to it, I really didn't follow it very much. Since the trial has ended, and I'll just give you a couple examples here. I think Matt Gaetz suggested that he be made a congressional intern. Marjorie Taylor Greene referred to him as, quote, one of the good guys. Tucker Carlson, well, Fox actually had a film crew embedded. I don't know if you know that. During the trial, there was a Fox crew that were, I guess, on the inside. They're producing a documentary about it. I think it's called The Trial of Kyle. So that should be, I think that's coming out in a couple months. But Tucker Carlson on his show claimed that the U.S. would be better off if there were more people like Rittenhouse in it. Went on to describe him as bright, decent, sincere, dutiful, hardworking, and referred to him as a sweet kid. I think Sean Hannity was suggesting that he sue some of the public figures who were critical of him initially. Jeanine Pirro referred to him as a very empathetic young man and a truth teller who is far more mature than his years. The truth teller seems like maybe the greatest stretch of all. And then I thought this was interesting too. Greg Gutfeld praised him for killing what he referred to as 2 violent, disgusting dirtbags, which I think that comment specifically really gets to the heart of the us versus them mentality that it seems to color every single thing that happens in this country these days.
Yeah, and I think I talked to another friend about this, and it was really interesting. He said, I think the guy's an idiot. He said, and I don't think there was any noble intent at all. I think he just wanted to be the cool guy and feel special and powerful and be out there in the mix.
Totally.
And that's it. He said, so anyone who would do that in that situation is an idiot. And I said, I can get along with that. So I agree with you that, to make him out to be a hero, an idiot who shouldn't have been there.
So are these bad faith arguments that these, I mean, a lot of these people that I just mentioned are either Republican politicians or they're people on Fox News personalities, but do you think they actually believe that these things that they're saying, or is he just a symbol of their cause?
I think he's a symbol, and it's for votes, like, hey, the type of people who would vote for me think this. And so I'm going to say it. So they'll be like, yeah, that guy's, there are a lot of people who think like that, probably. People who don't really break things down logically and just choose a side, and then they're all for it. And, And I think, politicians, hey, if they think it'll get them a vote, it'll get them a vote. I do think when you talk about Sean Hannity saying the legal action, I don't think Sean Hannity's right there, but I have heard that there could be a case for him, for people who've publicly come out and called him. I saw some clips of people saying, yeah, he's the white supremacist who got off for shooting people at a Black Lives Matters rally, there were people like lawyers on some show saying, well, if that could cause him to be held out of a school, to be held out of a job, that could be he could have a case for slander.
Yeah, I was going to say slander. Well, that's interesting too, because I'm not sure how anyone who watched the trial could come away. There was absolutely zero evidence of any kind that the kid is a white supremacist. I did not get that.
Well, and those were just people on their side, just like these people that you mentioned here are like, and I said it's for votes, just to their party line and to keep the support of their people. The people on the other side are going to say, just because that's what their people want to hear. That's what people who are, on the left or want to vote for them are going to say. So I think people are just saying it. And I doubt the politicians really think about the ramifications of the things they're saying, because you could say this guy's a white supremacist and he shot people at a Black Lives Matters rally, which makes it sound like they could have been black, right? And he got off. That's just inciting people to be like, what? I can't believe he got off. This is a problem. He's shooting people at rallies. We're supposed to be allowed, people who don't get all the information are going to be led down. It's dangerous. Mm-hmm. I think it's very dangerous. I want to talk about, I looked up some definitions of privilege and white privilege, going back to it, because I'm going to tell you, well, just let me go through these. So 3 definitions of privilege. This is from Merriam-Webster.com. Number 1, privilege defined, a right or benefit that is given to some people and not to others. That's pretty simple. Number 2, a special opportunity to do something that makes you proud. So this would be like, I had the privilege of throwing the first pitch, right, at the baseball game. Or
that makes sense.
Yeah. Then, and this is the words in Merriam-Webster. Number 3, it said somewhat formal to start. So somewhat formal use of it apparently is the advantage that wealthy and powerful people have over other people in society. So that's the closest thing I can think of, right? When you think about the type of thing people are talking about.
Yeah, I would say so. And that is absolutely a real thing. I mean, one of probably the starkest examples of this is if you look at the Jeffrey Epstein case and how long he was able to operate. I mean, he was
Sure. So then they do have a definition in there of white privilege. So of course I'm going to look at that. I just wanted to make sure because at times when I was looking at this and saying, how was that privilege that he was not guilty? I said, I want to look up the definitions and make sure maybe I don't understand fully all of the uses. So white privilege defined was the set of social and economic advantages that white people have by virtue of their race in a culture characterized by racial inequality. And again, this was not an official, it's dependent on being in a culture characterized by racial inequality. And so they're not saying any actual culture is characterized by racial inequality, but that would be the definition of white privilege according to them. So what I started thinking of to try to take that apart is saying white privileged because there are no poor white people. And of course, that's not true. And, there are poor white people. And this would almost make me think if this systematic thing that I happen to know that, at least to my knowledge, tell me if I'm wrong, that white people, rich white people, aren't having meetings and saying, hey, let's go make that poor white couple over there rich because they're white. And like giving them an endowment or anything. That doesn't happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I won't purport to know what rich white people do behind closed doors, but
if they did, then we'd see all these poor white people not being poor. You and I both worked in Baltimore, and there were, your poor black neighborhoods and your poor white neighborhoods. Right?
Absolutely.
We worked in them both. So, sure. So that being said, I didn't have a real warm and fuzzy that. I understand that, but then I came up with a solution to this issue where the woman said this kid got off because of white privilege. So do you want to hear my solution?
I would love to. Hit me.
So my solution is, it's not like every January 1st that all white people wake up and there's a brand new Mercedes in their driveway, right? We're not being given anything special. Everyone's got their own certain circumstances that they're living under. So what I would say is this: when we talk about this case, going back to Rittenhouse, according to the law that was written, he was not guilty. The jury said it. So we've got sort of a playing field, and according to the rules, he did not get snapped in that trap, right? Because they said he was not guilty according to the laws that we have in place. Now, so if you have an African American in the same situation like that woman said, she said it would have been different. He would have been guilty. And during that evening when he ran across police officers, like you said, probably would have turned out different too. If you believe that, and I agree that that is a possibility, then that is not white privilege. That is Black disadvantage. And if you could say, hey, Black disadvantage, there's a situation where African Americans are not treated the same in general, in certain situations, then don't we need to bring them up? Because it's not saying like, hey, the white people are up here and have all this good stuff. It's like, no, we have set of rules and the white people are just being judged by those rules. But the Black people aren't being judged fairly by those rules. So I don't like the term privilege being used, because there's nothing in the law that says, self-defense, one of the things is you have to be, any reasonable person in the same situation would have to be in fear for their life to pull that trigger. And that qualifies, we'd say, okay, that was a self-defense. There's not a little byline that says, unless they're white, they just have to be scared that they were going to get their ass kicked. Right. And now, if there was a little addendum to that, to those parameters for self-defense, and I'd say, well, that's clearly white privilege, right? We've made an extra rule just for whites to be able to claim self-defense for even less than being fearful of their life. That would be privilege, but that's not the case. But if we think people aren't always treated fairly up and equal to that same standard, then because they're African American or whatever, then I say, well, that's a disadvantage. And we should look at it as a disadvantage and want to bring people up to the level, to use terms that many people like to use, where everyone's at least on somewhat of an even playing field.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I think the white privilege conversation is much, much bigger than our discussion here about Rittenhouse. I mean, there's a long history of Black people being kept out of the generational wealth builders. I mean, that's one small part of it, and it's a huge issue. But as far as looking at this case as an example of white privilege, no, I think what you said makes a lot of sense.
And that being said, that leads me to just using just that term privilege, which would lead some people to think that, oh, well, he got off because he was white. And we've already established he got off because, according to the law, the jury determined that it was self-defense. And it's not because he was white, and if another guy who was African American was in the same exact situation and didn't get off, okay, I get it. I would say that is that person's disadvantage. But I think using that term privilege makes people who don't really look into it and think hard enough and logically break it down to feel like, well, they're just getting off because they're white. They're getting extra rights. They're getting extra stuff. And you and I both know, I mean, no one sends you $1,000 a week because you're white, right? That doesn't happen unless you're working for it, right? So that being said, I feel like even using the term privilege, as it's thrown around so much in cases like this, can cause people to be upset, be mad, angry, and not like white people, act like they're getting over. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean,
this just came to me. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's like, I don't have anything extra by virtue of your disadvantage. Like, you're saying that I've got all that. I don't have anything extra. You're just saying you're not having the same treatment. It's like, so you're saying that I'm advantaged because you're disadvantaged. I'm not advantaged. I'm just here living, doing my thing, following the rules and whatever.
Well, yeah,
but just by virtue of you're not on a level playing field, you're saying that I've got some big advantage. I think it shouldn't be like, well, you're way up there. It's like, no, hey, I'm down here. We need to get me up. We need to rise me up to where we're all equal. That I can get along with. Not you're way up there, all lucky, just because you're white. That's looking at the problem the wrong way, I believe.
I guess, yeah, I guess what I would say is, to the disadvantaged, of course, it's going to look like that. I mean, that's how you would look at an unfair situation if you're on the short end of the stick. And to your point, that's exactly how you would look at the situation if you were on the long end of the stick, so to speak. Like, they're looking up because they feel like they're down.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're looking, and I just think using the word privilege can cause people to have animosity, right? And whereas if they say, hey, I feel like I'm disadvantaged here, and someone says, yeah, I agree, because it almost puts them like, if you think about it, people saying like, well, you're so lucky you have all this stuff. Then people like me are saying, well, I'm not lucky. I just work hard and do my thing. And it almost lends their feeling towards me to be like, well, yeah, why do I want to bring you up? All you're doing is saying that I'm such a bad person for being where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I think the term privilege doesn't make sense. I think disadvantage would be better.
I agree with you. I agree with you, but I wonder if, as two white guys, if we do, I agree with you because of my white privilege. Is that why I feel uncomfortable with you saying, like, it's tough, man. It's like, I think a lot of people, regardless of their skin color, struggle. I mean, there is a lottery to life, and you're born into a set of circumstances that you have no control over, and those circumstances don't discriminate. I mean, we should, as members of a high functioning society, aim to make it as fair as possible where we can. But yeah, I think generally, I mean, we are living in a time, and white privilege is just it's a part of the national vernacular.
Sure. No, I hear you. At the end of the day, at the end of this discussion, I would say, when going back, we started with Rittenhouse, that there's some laws that need to be changed about the gun carry laws. I think possibly parents could be looked at as setting, not properly handling this kid. I think it was self-defense, and as upsetting as it might be for some people, because it didn't come out the way they thought it should, which I think a lot of that may be based upon what media they're watching or what slant. At the end of the day, I don't think it was white privilege that the reason he got off. I think based upon the laws set up the way they are, he was not guilty.
And if he had been black and he went to trial and everything was exactly the same, and he had been found guilty of murder or some lesser charge, that wouldn't be white privilege. That would be an example of black disadvantage.
Yes.
When a 17-year-old can run around an American city with an assault rifle and use that assault rifle against 3 unarmed individuals and kill 2 of them, a gun that is not his, is not in his name, and face 0 consequences, something is broken. Something is broken that needs immediate and drastic attention. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that we arrived at this pretty early on, but some laws need to be changed. And I think that we also need to take a more honest look at the gun culture in this country and the gun obsession that so many people seem to have. Because, like I said, I followed the trial. I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what transpired that night. And I see nothing about that where a gun was helpful or useful or made the situation better. I think that everybody who brought a gun into that situation used poor judgment. I'll go a step further and say, I think everyone who was there used poor judgment. Go home. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, go home and make positive change another way, because that was not even an attempt at positive change, any of those people being there.
All right, man.
All right. So thanks so much for listening. If you have an idea for a topic, or if you'd like to hear anything else discussed on the podcast, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you enjoyed this discussion and you'd like to hear more balanced conversations, hit subscribe, because we would really appreciate it. This is Ben.
And this is Steve.
And we are balanced.